Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the forum, the ARCO forum of the Institute of Politics. Governor Clinton just said, wow. I think he looked up. And, you know, when this place is cooking, it's really great. When we get a crowd like this and 3 levels of people anxious to talk politics, it makes this place seem the way it ought to be. My name is Charles Royer. I'm director of the Institute of Politics, and before I came here, I was the mayor of the city of Seattle, and I never get a chance to talk about the city of Seattle in the forum. Governor Clinton has given me that chance tonight because I'm going to use this introduction to sneak in a few comments about the most beautiful city in all of America. Except perhaps for the one that you might come from. While attending the governor's conference in Seattle in August, Governor Bill Clinton created quite a stir in the press, as he had not yet announced his candidacy for president. The politically well-informed population of Seattle, and I know how good they are, was divided into 2 groups on that issue. Those people who thought he would announce, and those people who thought he should announce. A tough Seattle political reporter, one whom I know all too well, and from whom I carry many scars, described the governor this way: Kennedy-esque blue eyes, square jaw, silky smooth speech spiced with political passion, and that uncanny ability to carry on a seemingly normal conversation while cameras click and whir in his ear. He went on to write, quote, Clinton presents more than a clean-cut profile. He offers a dream resume: Yale Law School, Rhodes Scholar, family man, and 10 years as a governor from a region the party desperately wants to win back into its fold. Clinton also insists he possesses what the party needs more than anything: a new vision for middle-class American voters. Governor Clinton will tell you something of his vision tonight, but just a couple more words on his resume. Governor Clinton served as co-chair of the President's Education Summit with governors and played a major role, and I know that from my contact with other governors, in drafting the national education goals. He's former chairman of the Democratic Leadership Council, past chairman of the National Governors Association, and the Education Commission of the States. On October 3rd, standing in front of the old State House in Little Rock, Arkansas, Bill Clinton, the 42nd governor of that state, became the 5th major Democrat to announce his candidacy for President of the United States. Please help me welcome back to the forum the Honorable Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be back here. I believe this is the 3rd time in 4 years I have been here. 4 years ago to discuss the welfare reform proposal, which I was then working on behalf of the governors and with the Congress, which became the Family Support Act of 1988. Just a few months ago, with my good friend Robert Reich, who's honored with me by his presence here today, to discuss his book. He'll make more money on that presentation than I will on this one. And tonight, in a role I could only have barely imagined just a few months ago. Running for president is a humbling experience. The other night I was in Houston on my way to a dinner. I arrived at the airport and a man picked me up who had been a police officer for 28 years. And you know, every time you're in a new place, you're always listening for the slightest clue to where the pulse is, and this guy just hit me. I got in the car and he said, Governor, he said, I just saw you give a speech on C-SPAN and it was wonderful. Are you going to run for president? Sounded like an honest draft to me. I was virtually writing my inaugural address, you know how it is. And so I sort of swelled up and I said, well, do you think President Bush can be defeated? He said, Lord, no, I just want to know if you were running. But he went on to tell me all the grievances he had, all the hurts and the hopes. And it was a fascinating thing that this man had told me that the president couldn't be defeated because of the Gulf War and his stature in the world, but that he was absolutely consumed with worries for his job and the jobs of his family members and friends, for his inability to afford a college education for his children, for his fear that he had lost the battle for safe streets. The guy actually said, I've been a cop for 28 years and my side lost. He said, it isn't right for people who work for a living and do the right thing to go home and be afraid to walk on their blocks at night. And then he talked all about health care and his worries about that. Maybe someday having to choose between his sick mother and his children's needs. Just one thing after another. The guy talked for 20 minutes. I never got a word in edgewise. I just listened to him talk about everything that was wrong with the country. And when we pulled up at the restaurant, he said, Governor, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Which, for those of you who are students, that's Human Relations 101. You can learn a lot from that. And I said, I have too. I think you're terrific, and I appreciate the life you've given to your country and law enforcement, but I want you to remember that 20 minutes ago you told me that we could not have an election in this country in 1992. And he said, you know, I never thought about it that way. So I would like to begin, since this is a JFK school, with a political comment and then move to the substance. It is my opinion, and it is my opinion that the primary political advantage the president brings to this election is not, as commonly supposed, the victory in the Gulf War, where he took a position that I thought was well-founded, or his general achievements in foreign policy, the fact that we are seeing the peace conference have its first full day in Madrid today, something that I applaud the Secretary of State and the President for. That is not it. His primary weapon as we move into this election is an interesting two-edged sword. One, Presidents Reagan and Bush have absolutely disabled the presidency on the home front. And two, with a lot of help from the Democrats, particularly in Washington, they have discredited the capacity of politics to have a positive impact in people's lives. Let me give you an example of point one. You look at any poll, they'll tell you the same thing. Ask the voters, what do you give the president high marks in? Foreign policy, world leadership, the Gulf War. What do you give the president miserable marks in? The environment, education, health care, good jobs. What's most important? The environment, education, health care, good jobs. By 4-1, they'll say, it's time to turn our attention homeward. It's another issue I want to deal with. Then you say, you're going to vote for Bush or this other person, and they'll say Bush, 2-1. Why? Ask the question in another way. What is the president's job? They'll say, the Gulf War, foreign policy, standing up for America. In other words, for 12 years, this president and his predecessor basically said, America's problems are not my problems. When I was at Georgetown, we had a philosophy professor from Uruguay who used to taunt his students, and they would ask difficult questions. He would say, that is not my problem, that is your problem. That's what these guys have been saying to us for 12 years. What do you expect me to do? I'm just the president, right? That's, I mean, good jobs, good schools. I mean, that's the job of the governors and the mayors and the 1,000 points of light. That's what they said. And a lot of people have yet to reconnect the presidency to America's problems, a fundamentally important issue. And you should, as students of the political process, understand that. The second thing is, they have discredited government, and too often the Democrats have helped them. So the president knows he's in trouble now. And so what did he do? He gives a speech lambasting Congress, attacking the Senate for the way the Thomas hearings were conducted. That's great. If you say it that way, then you get people who are on both sides of the issue. And attacking the Congress for not living under the laws it makes, and for bounce checks and unpaid restaurant bills and unwarranted pay raises. All designed, you see, to keep the political process discredited and keep the heat off of himself. Now, I promise you, this is the major political advantage he carries into this campaign. Which is why I come here to tell you tonight that I think the American people already know at some level what is amiss in this country. What they don't know is what their president can do about it and whether they can trust a Democrat to carry the ball. That's what they don't know. And that's why I think that every person who is running for president in this election season has a particularly heavy obligation to say not only what is wrong with this country, but how we intend to put it right. That is really what we ought to focus on. And to do it in a way that shows we have the courage to tell people all over the country what they don't want to hear as well as what they do want to hear. And to say the same thing whether you're in a forum at Harvard or on a street in Harlem or in a farm in Iowa or a factory in Southern California. Because I believe that the two substantive issues of this campaign are as follows. One, do we want to continue this 12-year experiment in which the United States is the only major country in the world which says we need no national leadership, no national vision, no national partnership, no national strategy to keep our leadership in the global economy? We can do that with state and local government, 1,000 points of light, and the federal government sort of filling in the blanks. And two, will the President of the United States become an instrument of our national unity, as the President once was, or will he continue to be simply the most visible politician slicing up the electorate in ways that divide but always leave the President with a majority? Those are the profound but simple issues in this election. Now, on the first question, are we following the proper course in terms of our economic strategy? I think the record's pretty clear. A decade ago, we had the highest wages in the world. Now we're 10th. At least 10 countries do a better job of educating their children on any measure of international academic achievement. About a dozen send their men and women to work every day with better reading skills than we have, so that they can continually learn to do new things in a rapidly changing world. 19 do a better job of the relatively simple task of bringing babies into the world alive. Last year, the German economy grew by 3 times our rate, the Japanese economy by 4 times our rate. Japan just completed 58 months of continuous economic growth, the longest on record. The results are in. My wife gave me a psychology book a few months ago which had a lot of pearls of wisdom in it, but the one I remember was the author defining insanity as doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. That is the simple decision before the American people. The second issue, I think, is equally clear. This country is coming apart instead of coming together. Not only are middle-class families working longer hours, spending less time with their children to pay more, bringing home smaller paychecks, to pay more for health care, housing, education, and taxes, but poverty is exploding and families are continuing to disintegrate at rapid rates. Crime rates are exploding on the streets of all the cities of America without regard to size. And at the time when we need this country to come together so that we can reclaim our economic leadership, restore the middle class, and guarantee a better future for those of you who are a generation younger than me, the country is coming apart. Therefore, it is not enough for the President to simply be another politician that figures out how to carve the electorate up. Only the President can be an instrument of our national unity. And unless we have some sense of community, of common purpose, of moving together, and I would argue to you, of one that permits us all to change our behavior for the better, then no government action will suffice. That's why I have been particularly aggrieved at the way the President has played the civil rights issue. We need a civil rights bill, which passed the Senate today, by the way, for the simple reason that in the 1990s, 70% of the new workforce entrants will be women or racial minorities. And you have to have some rules of workplace fairness. This is not now, nor was it ever, a quota bill. This is essentially the same bill we had for 23 years before the Supreme Court took it out. Half that time I was a public official in a state that is small enough so that even your enemies smile and call you an SOB by your first name. So if anybody in my state had thought it was a quota bill, I promise you they would have told their governor. Not one soul ever said it, because it wasn't. Why did George Bush want this civil rights bill to be a quota bill? Because he knows an important part of his electorate are middle and lower middle class white males who think that he represents their social values and their commitment to strength, but whose incomes are going down like a rock. So what did he want to do to them with this quota issue? He wanted to have them look at blacks and Hispanics and women and say, those people want my job or my promotion. He wanted to say to them in the election, of course I'm not going to do anything for you, but those Democrats, they're going to do something to you. Vote for me and I will let you go into decline painlessly. I mean, that's what that whole deal was about. I've been there. I'm a Southerner, I know. They've been running that scam on us for decades. You find the most economically insecure white people, you scare the living hell out of them, you stay in power when you don't deserve it. I mean, that's what they were trying to do. Now, so, George Bush says, John Danforth goes to see him and says, give us a bill. Now, this is a guy that shepherded Clarence Thomas through the Supreme Court, not exactly a raving lefty. He says, give us a bill. The president says, no. The Business Roundtable, a conservative group of business executives, said, give us a bill. The president says, no. Bob Dole, the Republican leader, says, give us a bill. The president says, no. David Duke wins in Louisiana, saying in public what the rest of them whisper in private. And the president pollster goes to him and says, you better take a bill. And the president says, yes. That's what happened. Everybody knows that. Oh, look at the way they used Clarence Thomas, who went to law school with Mr. Reich and Mr. Isaacson, who's here, and me and a few others. He was their quota appointment. But they got a twofer. Right? He was black and against the right to privacy. And he said in the hearings he had never discussed Roe v. Wade with anybody. Not anybody. I mean, not even in the privacy of his own home. Let me tell you something. I used to teach constitutional law. I spent 2 weeks on it. And my students would say, why are you doing this? I mean, this is simple. 3 trimesters. We know the rule of law. We can answer the test question. Let's go on to something that's more complicated. I said, this case will convulse American jurisprudence because it's a Supreme Court playing God. There is no ultimately right answer, but I approve of this case. And you got to decide what you think, because it is at the core of hard decisions of the Supreme Court. I talked about it with everybody. And so did anybody else who went to law school when it was decided like we did. Why? Because now we can use this whole issue as an instrument of division. So what you have to decide is, especially those of you who are younger, you got more time ahead of you than I do. I got in this race because I've been a governor longer than anybody else who's serving now. I've worked hard to do just what the president wanted me to do. Presidents Reagan and Bush, they said, we're not going to raise taxes. You want more money for education and highways and infrastructure? You raise them. So I did. So I can be part of their 30-second ads in this election if you nominate me. I did. I did what I was supposed to do, to create a new structure of opportunity in education and to restructure our economy and to do all those things. I tried to spend more on education and the environment and economic development while federal aid was being cut. I tried to improve health care while they were putting more and more mandates on, not controlling costs and not giving us enough money to keep up. And all along the way, we produced 11 balanced budgets, even 11 modest surpluses, because we were tough on spending And we left a lot of people disappointed who thought we ought to spend more on other things. So that now the people who like this deal will attack me for raising money for education and attack me for not spending more money on other things at the same time. They're just like Reagan and Bush. As long as you're outside, you don't have to make any decisions. You can criticize it all. And I came to see that there was a limit to what any governor can do. And I saw the people that I grew up with. And I'm lucky. I have lunch once a month with my best friend from grade school, my best friend from junior high, my best friend from high school. They're working people. And I see the fear in their eyes, and I wonder how they're going to educate their children. The terror that if they change jobs, they'll lose their health insurance. The little anguish they feel, having done everything they were supposed to do as Americans, thinking they're going to be consigned to a lifetime of struggle without reward or security. And I don't want you to grow up into that kind of world. I don't want to be responsible for the first generation of Americans to grow up worse than their parents. And I know now, I've tried it the other way for 11 years. I have paid the price of time, and I am telling you we cannot turn this country around unless we have a leader determined to do it. And that's what this election's about. I think we need to literally use this election to redefine the relationship between the president and the people, between the government and the people. I think that we ought to call it a new covenant because where I come from, that means more than agreement. It means a solemn agreement for change in which the government commits, starting with the president, first of all, to regain our economic leadership. And if you want to ask questions about this, we can. I've worked on this a long time, but basically my view is on all of our economic policies, incentives for investment in the private sector, tax fairness, the organization of our economy to compete in the global economy, trade questions. My view on all those questions is the answer should be, what does it take to meet the competition to compete and win? How are we going to transfer every dollar of defense research and development to commercial research and development? Japan, one half our size, spends twice as much money as we do on commercial R&D. If you've got a computer now that you carry around and it's got one of those real flat screens, a microelectronics revolution developed in the United States by an American scientist, the patent held by a small business for a while, held then by Westinghouse for a while. Finally now 8 companies are producing it, providing thousands and thousands of high-wage jobs for the workers, all 8 in Japan. There are at least 15 other examples. We now have a list of 20 to 25 technologies that will shape the future of America, shape the future of the world. Every other country has the same list. The only difference is they're doing something with the list and we're not. So the question is, what does it take to organize ourselves, not to be protectionist, but to compete and win in the global economy? I will answer that question, and that is what I will do. The second thing you have to do, if you want to have economic leadership, is control health care cost. It is, of course, a health care and a human needs issue, but it is also an economic issue. We're spending 30% more than any country in the world. We're doing less with it. 2/3 of all strikes are over health care issues. This is the only nation in the world that asks labor and management to resolve the question of health care costs, so that no matter how these strikes are settled, both sides lose. Because no matter what you do, you're either going to have disenchanted, anxiety-ridden workers who won't be as productive as they ought to be, or spend too much money on health care, which undermines the long-term productivity and growth potential of the company, because the government will not do what every other government does, and that is to control health care costs and find a way to cover everybody. In energy, we got an energy policy in this country. It's called cheap oil. Doesn't matter where it comes from. So we now get more than half of our oil from overseas in a way that undermines the integrity of every policy our country has in the Middle East. I believe there were non-oil reasons that justified the action the President took in the Persian Gulf. It was a unique and unusual moment with the United Nations coming together, the Soviets taking our part, the Chinese getting out of the way. All kinds of reasons for doing it. But a lot of Americans believe we did it because we didn't want Saddam Hussein to have all the oil in Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And there is no excuse for this energy policy. This is one of the silver bullets in the American economy. You want to free up money to invest? One of the things you have to do is to move out of a dependence on foreign oil toward more reliance on American natural gas, which is cheap, plentiful, environmentally safe, and reach international standards of energy conservation and efficiency. If every office building and factory in this country met the same standards our European competitors do, we would free up billions of dollars to invest in our own economy. And that's a big part of the economic message. If we don't do it, we won't have enough money to invest. Excuse me. Every time I get a real good line, I'm convinced that the Republicans put something in my water. If we develop a competitive economic policy, then we have to make sure we can take advantage of it. We're nowhere near as well educated as we need to be. A lot of education work is done in schools and policy set at the state and local level. But there is something for the federal government to do. When we wrote the national education goals, and Governor Cunin of Vermont was there, and we wouldn't sign off, the governors wouldn't, unless the president promised to assume a federal responsibility. And they've forgotten all about that. Because what they want to do is to lecture the parents. The president wants to tell the parents what they got to do, and the teachers what they got to do, and the governors what they got to do. They want to give a report card every year where they grade us, and we never get to grade them. Now, which position would you rather be in politically? Would you like to be the president that gets to judge everybody else and doesn't have to lift a finger, see the cow jump over the moon? Or the governor that has to raise the taxes? Or the teacher that has to explain why, in the context of the American educational system, he or she doesn't produce world-class results? Here again, they just want to offload responsibility. I believe there are the following national responsibilities. One, get all the kids to the starting line in the same place. Preschool for everybody, fully fund Head Start. Two, restore the dignity of work to high school graduates who don't want to go to college but don't want to be in dead-end jobs by developing national apprenticeship systems like all our competitors have. Do not disable and rob people of their capacity by consigning them to do what happens today. Younger workers in this workforce who only go to high school are making 25% less than their counterparts did 15 years ago because we, the leaders of the country, have stuck it to them. Three, develop national standards and a national exam system and give people the results, but do it in the context that permits everybody to win instead of fingering the losers. And four, this would affect most of you more. Stop this insane policy that Reagan and Bush have followed for 12 years of trying to cut out aid to middle-class college students. Cost of a college education has gone through the roof. We know that a young college graduate makes 70% more than a young high school graduate in the workforce. Why are we trying to make it harder for people to succeed? If you elect me president, I'm going to ask the Congress to establish a trust fund out of which any American could borrow the money to go to college if he or she would pay it back in one of two ways, either as a small percentage of income over time until that year's debt is paid, or with 2 or 3 years of national service here at home as teachers, as policemen, as nurses. That's what we need to do. The GI Bill totally changed the structure of opportunity in America. It changed what living meant to people who served our country in World War II and got to come home and access it. We ought to be, look at what it costs to get a college education today. And not just at Harvard or Radcliffe. Look at what's happening to tuition at state universities. In my state this year, our legislature set up a program that made way over half of our students eligible by income to earn a tuition grant for 4 years if they just got a C+ average in the recommended college courses and stayed off drugs over and above any other scholarship or loan they got. If we did that in a state that's 47th in per capita income, this country ought to be able to finance a college education for every American that's willing to pay something back. We ought to do that. Now, those are the things that I think we ought to do. And that's what the president's responsibility is. Here's my final point. I think a covenant implies an agreement in which the people have to do something too. And again, I would tell you that having labored in the vineyards for 11 years, if only the government changes and the people don't, we still won't make it as a nation. And I have tried to go all over this country and speak to groups and tell everybody something they did not want to hear. I'll give you an example. I go into these classes in New Hampshire and I tell them, look, I'm going to give you a college education, but we've got another problem, the attitudes of American students toward learning. Most of your competitors in Europe and Asia, they're raised to believe how well they do in school depends on how hard they work and whether their parents encourage them. In America, we raise our kids to believe how well they do in school depends on the IQ God gave them and their family's income. And that won't work. We have to change that. No teacher can change it alone. Certainly no governor, not even the president, can change it alone. But until we believe that all children can learn, then all this money is going to be misspent. We have to say to people on welfare, my friend Mary Jo Baines here, we worked on this stuff for years. I have concluded that we should end the welfare system as we know it. And let me give you a couple of examples. There's an incredibly poignant story now making the rounds through New Hampshire. 800 people a week exhausting their unemployment benefits. Middle-class people going in and applying for welfare to get that tiny check for them just to make their house payments. Just to make their house payments so they don't have to put their kids in the street. And they're talking about how humiliated they are to do it. They shouldn't be humiliated. They ought to be proud. That's what that system was set up for. It's not their fault they're out of work. They should not be ashamed to go access a program that was established to help people when they're in a tight. Why are they ashamed? Because they know that half the people on welfare are going to be there from now on till kingdom comes. Because they've been allowed to maintain themselves on a pitiful life support system that maintains a permanent underclass in this country because the leaders have admitted that we have failed to maintain a route from poverty to the middle class. And I think what we ought to do is to spend much more money on people who are in this state of dependency on education, training, and support for their children, child care, and whatever it takes to provide a medical coverage. But after a certain number of months, 18 months or 2 years, we should say to all those people, you either got to go to work in the private sector or start doing community service work to keep getting this check. We have got to sever the link between entitlement and income in this country to change this culture. And we will be doing something good for those people. Even at Harvard, you can clap for that. I gave a speech to a labor breakfast the other day, and I said, I'm for the Mexican-American trade agreement. And I know you aren't. I govern a state where jobs have been on a fast track to Mexico for a long time. You can't stop them if you have short-sighted management that wants this to be a low-wage, hard-work country. And Mexico needs to get richer so they don't have to keep sending their people over to our country to do the low-wage jobs and displace our workers. And I think we ought to have a tough trade deal which imposes reasonable but firm environmental standards, child labor standards, and labor law standards. But I'm for that because a rich country can't get richer unless its trading partners get richer. And I said, I'll tell you something else. I want you to have national health insurance. I want your company not to ever go broke because of this. I want there to be a national system to guarantee training for you if your plant closes down. Because it's not your fault if an enterprise fails, so that you can train up instead of move down. But every one of you are going to have to be willing to scrap work rules if they get in the way of productivity and change. Every union member has to be committed to the continuous recreation of the productive process every day, because that's the only way we're going to make it as a country. I was in New York last week and I said, you know, I don't mind all this debt that corporate America took out in the 80s. What I mind was that the debt had nothing to do with investment. We had all these mergers and acquisitions and ran these companies into debt. And when people took all their tax deductions and the companies were so burdened with debt they couldn't survive, they threw the workers into the street, no goods or products were produced, and the executives bailed out with golden parachutes to happy lives. That's wrong. In America, a study produced was reported in the New York Times just a couple of days ago. A study by an expert in compensation said the other day that the average American executive in the top corporations makes 100 times what the lowest paid worker does. But there was no connection between the pay of the executives and the performance of the company. If you poll those people, 100% of them would be for merit pay for teachers. Wouldn't they? 100% of them would be for merit pay for teachers. But the survey said how much money they get depends on how much of an arm they put on the board and whether they got weak-kneed people on the board that'll roll for them. And yet we give a tax deduction no matter what executive compensation is. 1% productivity growth last year. In Germany, where the productivity growth was 3%, 23 to 1. In Japan, it's 17 to 1. This is crazy. This is crazy. You know, in my state, most people don't resent Sam Walton being worth billions of dollars because he made his money the old-fashioned way. They earned it. All the money's in stock because they committed to the future of the company. Many people who just worked in the company are worth millions because they had stock option plans for the employees, and they produced something. They didn't just shuffle paper, let the people on top get out with millions, and the heck with the people on the bottom. That has to change. And finally, government has to change. We need congressional finance reform. Congress ought to live under the laws it makes. They ought not to raise their pay till middle income pay starts going up again. Just because people in politics are in the upper 10% and they're getting richer doesn't mean those of us that have to set an example should do it. When average wages go up again, we should have a congressional pay raise, and not until. When we start growing as a country again. And finally, I don't agree that you need to go down to $100 a contribution and all that. I do. You want to know what the problem with politics is in Congress? It is the cost of television. And the fact that every congressman lives in mortal terror of the Willie Horton ad. You want to do something about congressional reform on the finance side, limit spending, require everybody that gets a license from the FCC to open the airwaves to a certain amount of genuine, competitive, honest discussion so that television can become an instrument of education instead of political assassination. And either eliminate PACs or don't let them give more than $1,000. Put them on an equal footing with the rest of us instead of letting them give $5 grand. If you did that, you would have the reform you seek. Now, those are some of the things I think we need to do. You have to decide what you think this election's about, whether you think I'm right or wrong, and who you're going to support. But those of you who are younger than I am, which is more than half of you by a good long way, you got a lot more at stake in this than I do. I have lived more than half of my life, and I have been extremely fortunate. But it makes me angry when I do things like go to Europe as I did last summer, and I look into the eyes of European business and political leaders, and I know they think our best days are behind us. Or when I go to Asia and I see people I've known for a decade who no longer mask their true convictions behind politeness, and they tell me that we're going down and we don't have the discipline to recover our greatness. And I know what that means is the people I grew up with have to feel like they're failing their children. This is not some esoteric economics lecture. This is about how you and your children and your children's children are going to live. And it's about whether you're going to let this country literally come apart at the seams, starting in the cities and spreading outward. So you have these two decisions to make. Do you want a national leader, a national vision, a national strategy? And do you believe the president should be an instrument of national unity, or let this thing just keep unraveling? To me, the answer is clear, simple, and direct, and that's why I am running for president. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Clinton. We have microphones located on both floors. If you kind of queue up there, Governor Clinton will recognize you in some rotating and fair order. We have until about 9:15, so we have more than 30 minutes for Q&A. Let's try to get as many in as we possibly can by asking questions and not necessarily making statements, unless you feel they could be helpful to the governor.
Well, I'll just rotate the mics. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that all? There's none up there, is there? Okay, go.
Thank you. Governor, I realize the so-called third world doesn't seem likely to play a major role in the next campaign, but I wonder what obligation you view the industrialized nations, and particularly the U.S., as owing to developing countries, and what specific programs you'd support to alleviate poverty in those countries.
I think for those who will work with us and who have the capacity to help their own people, that both through the United Nations and through other more direct channels, we should support efforts to alleviate human misery and suffering and efforts to promote long-term economic growth. Let me just give you one little statistic. If the Latin American countries had enjoyed the same growth rate in the last 3 years as they did in the middle 3 years of the 1970s, our trade deficits would have been approximately 20% lower than they were. So the collapse of the economic and social structure of much of the developing world has been a source of lost opportunity for us as well as human misery for them. And one of the things that I meant to say in my talk that I didn't is that I basically believe that we cannot withdraw from the world. And I don't want you to interpret anything I said as an isolationist or a protectionist message. I just know that it's our ability to take care of our own people that gives us the strength, the power, and the wherewithal to stand up for what we believe in abroad and to engage ourselves in these humane efforts. So I think that we will continue to be involved in that. I think we will have to begin to put most of our emphasis south of our own borders, because that's where we have the opportunity to have the biggest impact, I think, in the near term.
Did you have specific aid policies in mind, sir?
Well, what do you, not a specific dollar amount, but there are lots of existing policies which I think can be activated. And I think you have, it depends on really what kind of government you've got in those countries and what kind of delivery options you have, whether you're giving food, whether you're giving economic assistance, and what kind it is. Yes?
Governor Clinton, I've heard you talk tonight a lot about middle-class concerns, and I'm wondering if you favor a middle-class tax cut.
I do. I do. But let me talk to you about there. I want you to understand there are two different issues here, and I don't want to get them clouded, because I don't think we should present a middle-class tax cut as if it is a short-term panacea for the immediate economic problems of this country and New England. What you've got here is, and in most other places, is an economic crisis that, in my judgment, is caused primarily by two things. One is the long-term economic slowdown we've seen, which began in '73, and which has been aggravated in the last decade by our economic policies. And then on top of that is the collapse of our financial institutions, precipitated largely by the collapse of commercial real estate, which was aggravated by the '81 Tax Act, which fueled too much speculation in commercial real estate, compounded by the '86 Tax Act, which took away all incentives to invest in it. So the reason I'm for a middle-class tax cut is that I think over the long run, most middle-class people spend most of what they have, and that will help to fuel a long-term consumer-driven, stronger economy. And because it just isn't fair to have raised taxes on people whose incomes were going down at the middle level, and to have lowered tax rates on people whose incomes were going up at the upper level. That's just not fair. So we need some tax adjustments just for fairness sakes, and because I think that's appropriate. Let me just say one other thing. I would like to see the initial tax relief focused on in two ways. One would affect lower middle class people primarily, but that would be the refundable earned income tax credit, because I think we need to reach a point in this country where nobody who's willing to work for 11, 40 hours a week is living in poverty. And we have a mechanism that is relatively sharply focused and inexpensive to overcome that. That's the refundable earned income tax credit. And for other middle-class people, I would like to see some additional help be given to those who are raising children. So I would like to see the child care deduction either increased or converted to a credit and plugged in.
So you would favor the Rockefeller plan?
I favor that direction. We may not be able to afford that whole load in 1 year, given the size of this deficit and our present inability to predict whether we can stop the failure of banks. But that is the general direction we should be going in. Yes?
You've talked a lot tonight about the future. What I want to ask about is the future specifically with regards to the budget deficit. If we start with the proposition that a budget has current account expenditures and capital account expenditures and that it's acceptable to fund capital investment with debt, are you willing to say that if elected president you will neither submit nor sign a budget which is not balanced in the current account?
In the current account?
In the current account.
Well, there's one big problem with it depends on what your definition of current account is. Does your definition of current account include paying off unpredictable failures for banks and S&Ls and interest on the debt?
Suppose you capitalize the S&L problem.
No, wait, that's fair.
That's an that's an
fair.
anomaly.
Okay, let's use the answer to your question is that's exactly what I want to do, and let me tell you how I propose to do it. Okay? Let me tell you how I propose to do it. First of all, instead of using all those accounting words, let's use political words. We need in the best sense. We need to spend more money on the future and relatively less on the present and the past, right? Future means education, research and development, environmental investments, and infrastructure. Present means this year's programs, right? Past means interest on the debt and the S&L and bank mess, right? We basically are spending more money on the present and the past and less money on the future than we were 10 years ago. We need to reverse that. If you look at current expenditures, they are largely being the thing that is going up the most rapidly for the government is the same as going up most rapidly for private sector, which is absolutely uncontrolled health care cost. What we need to do, instead of budgeting current programs on revenue estimates, which is always a loser, because there will always be a bipartisan conspiracy to overestimate revenues. There will. Republicans will always want to spend more on something. Democrats will always want to spend more on something. What we should do is tie increases in spending to increases in per capita income plus additions to the workforce. If that is your lid for aggregate increase in current expenditures, then you could have the freedom, because listen, that'll save billions of dollars over the next 5 or 6, 7 years. Then you have the freedom to invest in new programs, and if they literally are investments for the future, you can do it with debt. That's what I think we ought to do, yes.
Governor, I was wondering your opinion on school choice.
I am strongly in favor of public school choice plans which have protections against discrimination based on race or income. Our state was the second state in the country to adopt a school choice plan and the first state with a large minority population to do so. Minnesota was the first state to do so. Minnesota is 94% white, and almost all the minorities in Minnesota live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which was under a federal court order, therefore was exempted from their school choice plans. So they didn't have to deal with this. In no state which has adopted a school choice plan, and about 8 have now, have more than 1% of the students chosen to go to school outside their resident district. Most of them who choose to change do so either because there's a district next door where they can get better courses, or because they don't think that the school's doing a good job, or because they don't fit in where they are and they may fit in better somewhere else. The reason I don't favor the private voucher system the President's advocated is that I think that would undermine an already underfinanced public school system in many places. The reason I do favor public school choice is that while in no state have more than 1% of the people changed, they've changed, and all people feel like they have more power and more choice, which I think is good. Part of the governmental revolution I think we need to effect. And secondly, if you look at the Minnesota results, because they've had the plan 2 years longer than anybody else, after 3 years, while only less than 1% of the kids had changed, 40% of the schools with no tax increase had dramatically improved or substantially improved their curriculum because of the competition. So I think it's a good thing. Yes.
Governor, in 1988, you gave the nominating speech at the Democratic National Convention. You had a lot to say back then. I was wondering whether
You'll never get a job with Emily Post, you know.
I'm wondering if now you can give us some reasons why you think the Democrats lost and how it's going to be different in 1992.
I think we got beat because on Election Day, the majority of the people didn't think that we could be trusted to defend the national interest, questioned whether we would put their values into our social programs, and wondered whether we could be trusted to manage the economy with real discipline. That's another, I think that in other words, I think that until the last 3 weeks when Michael Dukakis developed the sort of on your side message, which by the way is the only way to win any election. You don't have to say on your side, but the majority of people have to believe you're on their side. Right? And the reason David Duke is doing so well in Louisiana today, even is getting voters, including that one lawyer who was written up in the New York Times who marched with a black armband when Martin Luther King was killed, is that you've got all these people who believe the walls are closing in on them. They are totally disoriented and they want to be like a bull that goes in a china shop and breaks everything. Because they don't think anybody is on their side. The way I think you have to overcome it is to do 3 things. One is articulate an affirmative message from day one. A lot of people, the political pundits, have even made fun of me. They say, the Economist said that Bill Clinton's problem is he's got 8 programs for every 2 problems. But at least if you hire me, you know what you're getting, right? This is an employment interview. That's what an election is. It's a job interview. I showed up to be interviewed tonight. I want you to hire me. You're entitled to know what you're getting. 1. 2, I think we have to be very sensitive to how angry people are and why they're disoriented. And the Democrats, who want to be the party of government, do not need to be going around defending the most egregious faults of Congress or anybody else. We ought to be for revolutionizing government. David Osborne, who lives here, has written a whole book that's about to be published on reinventing government. We ought to be, the Democrats should be, for more choice in public services, for empowering low-income people to make those choices, for greater accountability in public programs, and for literally restructuring the government so that you eliminate unnecessary programs, middle layers of management, and change the way people connect to their government. That can be done. Fortune magazine wrote an article the other day about Madison, Wisconsin, and the state of Arkansas as the first 2 governments that had really taken on this whole quality management thing. We're trying to revolutionize the way we do government. I think that's important. The third thing is, when they come after you with Willie Horton and the flag and the Boston Harbor, you got to deck them instead of shut your mouth. You got to go after them. Those are the, so that's what you have to do. Did I have it done all? No, you're next.
Governor, many people feel that cutting the cost of health care, as you say, is merely rationing via the back door. Are you in favor of the rationing of health care, and if so, what would you begin rationing?
First of all, we ration health care every day in this country. The answer to your question is, if you mean am I in favor of rationing health care, by that, do I think we ought to give anybody second-class care, rob anybody of the chance to stay alive and live a useful life? And the answer to that is no. I would follow a national health care system that I believe would, or I would try to implement, that I think would improve the health of the American people. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, folks. You look at any comparative index of health characteristics in our country and others, and we don't look so healthy. So whatever you want to say about our wizardry and our technology, we got some serious problems in this country in the way we do health care. So let me be specific. 1, if you go to community rating on insurance policies and go to more or less uniform national plans and require HMOs and self-insurers and everybody else to conform to a greater uniformity, you will eliminate billions and billions and billions of dollars of administrative overhead that exist only in the American health care system. Example, Germany gets 94.5 cents on the dollar of insurance into direct health care. America gets 84 cents. We spend $450 billion on health care. That is, if my math is right, $47.5 billion. That's enough to cover all the uncovered people in this country.
You're saying by better administration?
Better, yes. Just by cleaning up the financing, you can close about a third of the gap between ourselves and the major industrialized countries of the world. Now, another third of it, you would have to control cost. Now, you'll have to decide whether this is rationing. Kansas City, Missouri has 6 magnetic resonance imagers, and you could serve everybody in the Kansas City area who uses those machines with no delay, with only 3. Do I believe we should have 3 instead of 6? You bet I do. I believe the hospital should own them jointly or participate in them jointly, and we should have planning on how we deal with technology so that everybody can have access to it without undue delay, but so that we don't grant too many permits just so health providers can compete with each other in ways that run up the cost of health care. So I do believe that we should do that. Do I think we should consider changing the billing policies of hospitals where every Band-Aid, every IV, every aspirin is billed for separately, and move away from a fee-for-service system which plainly encourages people to spend more rather than less? Yes, I think we should begin to move away from that. But can we do it without rationing health care in the way that you mentioned? I believe we can. That's the other 2/3. The last third of the difference is a cultural difference. It's the way that we behave. We have to have more access to preventive and primary care for older people and for low-income people in rural areas and in inner cities, because, among other things, we have this exorbitant low birth weight rate, which is extremely expensive. A normal baby costs $3,000. One under 5 pounds costs $50. One under 3 pounds costs $150,000. So the rest of it will require us to change some of our behavior, get on top of the AIDS thing before it absolutely explodes. George Bush has said the word AIDS twice, I think, in the last 3 years. It is a major problem. And so if you want to close the whole gap, we're going to all have to change to get to that last third. But you can deal with 2/3 of the cost difference and save the competitiveness of American industry without rationing health care, I think, in the sense that you mean it. Yes?
I was wondering if you could speak a little further on your views on free trade, and specifically if you have any plans to resurrect GATT, perhaps unilaterally.
I would like to resurrect GATT, and if it becomes infeasible to do so, I would like to explore whether or not we could establish some new organization affiliated with the United Nations that could process these complaints more quickly. In the meanwhile, I think we have to have a series of very finely tuned weapons at our disposal, which we can rapidly bring to bear when we think we're being worked over. I think we have to meet the competition. But we cannot continue to be, let me just give you an example. We talked very reasonably and sanely to our European and Japanese allies about how we think tied aid is a very bad thing. It's bad form to tie assistance to a country to their using your contractors. And please let's don't do this anymore. And they have these polite little meetings with us, and they say, oh, you're absolutely right. Then we go out of the meetings, and they keep doing it, and we don't. So we lose a lot of business. My position is going to be, don't put up barriers, expand trade every year, but meet the competition. Other example, this doesn't, if other countries do a better job with export finance than we do, I will try to change the export finance rules. If other countries permit their high-tech companies to suspend their equivalent of antitrust laws, to pool their research and development funds to develop new products, I would do the same. In other words, I want us to reorganize without developing a command and control, heavy-handed industrial policy. I want the markets in America to be organized so they can compete and win.
Cut subsidies?
Cut subsidies in this country? Yeah, if our competitors would do it, I would.
Would you
I would give anything if we could get an agricultural agreement out of GATT. It'd be the best thing that ever happened to the American farmers. We would eat our competitors alive, but they do not want to give it to us. And would I cut subsidies if it put high-income jobs in America out of business because our competitors wouldn't do it? No, I would not do that. My goal is to meet the competition. I can look at these other economies. If they're growing faster than we are and they're having more high-wage success than we are, I want us to be a high-wage, high-growth, high-opportunity society. And I believe the first and the most important thing is to educate the American people and to have a system of lifetime education where people are continually learning. So when businesses close down, there's a training system which lifts them up again. Because I really believe if we've got the most skilled workforce in the world, we'll always be competitive, even if we're a little more flexible and less protectionist than other countries are. But I do think we have to look at how we handle finance, how we handle research and development, how we move ideas from the laboratory to the marketplace. And I think we have to deal with some trade responses. Yes?
Governor Clinton, since its inception in 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations has been responsible for a parade of foreign policy disasters throughout the world. Could you please tell us all why you are a member of this organization?
Because I don't agree with your analysis of it. Yes.
Well, what about H. Rowan Gaithers? He was the president of the Ford Foundation at the time, and he said that the emphasis of the organization would be to merge the Soviet Union comfortably together with the United States, economically.
Well, a lot of the people who are in the Council on Foreign Relations are responsible, both Republicans and Democrats, are responsible for over 40 years of standing up to communism and standing up for freedom.
You mean promoting communism?
No, you listen to me. You wait a minute. I'll listen to this. I'll do this one time, and then I'm going to, you remember, you get one question, and I get to answer. This country won the Cold War because they had a corrupt system that failed from the inside out, and because Republicans and Democrats alike had a bipartisan policy to stand up for freedom over 45 years. And a lot of the people who did that were in that organization. And for you to denigrate their patriotism and undermine it, I think is part of the problem that this country's got today. But we do have a First Amendment. I respect your right to free speech, but I disagree with you, and I don't think we have anything else to say.
Cuomo is hesitating to enter the race because he doesn't presidential candidate and governor of New York. How do you feel that you can successfully be both an effective governor of Arkansas in the coming 18 months and also an effective candidate for president?
That's a good question and a fair one. Let me make 2 or 3 observations about the other situations you mentioned and then tell you about mine. Number one, no governor in the history of this country has ever resigned to run for president. Now, maybe you think Franklin Roosevelt should have, but he didn't. Maybe maybe we believe governors should not be considered for the highest office in the land. But the thing that makes the question fair is that whether you like it or not, Ronald Reagan and George Bush made the governor's job much more important. That is, as they offloaded more and more responsibilities, they incredibly increased the dimension and the difficulty of the day-to-day business of being governor. That's what makes your question a fair and difficult one. My own view is that what happened here, now I was an outsider looking in, was complicated by the fact that a lot of people in Massachusetts believed that the financial difficulties of the state were sort of put on hold or delayed in their airing, you know. And that Governor Cuomo, just to use his own words, is concerned because I heard him giving a speech the other night, a great speech to the broadcasters of his state, and he was talking about the present scope and scale of the financial difficulties of New York. So I think, frankly, that there are some rules you have to follow, but each case is different. Now, let me tell you what I did. First of all, I went home and spent a lot of time working through this before I made this decision. I spent hours and hours and hours one-on-one in meetings with my cabinet members, going through every problem and every opportunity that we knew or could foresee. I spent a lot of time with the legislative leadership. I spent a lot of time with my lieutenant governor, who under our law becomes the acting governor with all the authorities of the job when I cross the state line. I also thought a lot about my staff and its needs, and here's what I did. First of all, we identified all the most significant problems of the state and our most significant opportunities, and we set in motion a plan to deal with all the problems and seize the opportunities. And that plan is being carried out. Secondly, I worked out an ongoing daily relationship with my lieutenant governor, who is an exceptionally able person. Thirdly, I hired someone to come in as chief of staff of the governor's office, who just retired as the chairman of the biggest bank in our state and is one of our state's most prominent citizens. My enemy said when he came in, we finally got an administrator in the governor's office. And finally, I said to our people, we will never play my politics with this state's affairs. Never. We will conduct the business of this state as we always have. Example, the day after I announced for governor, I cut state spending $25 million. Because revenues are down a little there, just like they are in most states. So I think the key is make sure you've got a system that you can operate day to day on. Spend some time on it every day. Go home and work on it when you can. I can just spend a day, well, almost 2 full days, really working through a lot of stuff at home on this. And don't play politics with your state's condition. If things get bad, level. I think, to be fair, people are much more sophisticated now about state problems. They understand that governors are not independent actors, that, you know, Pete Wilson and Lowell Weicker have found out the hard way that it's more fun to be a senator in the Republican Reagan Revolution dishing it out than a governor having to pick up the pieces. But that's a fair question, and that's my best answer. Yes?
Governor Clinton, you spoke of links between poverty and the middle class. For millions of Americans, that link has been military service, but people are excluded from military service every day based on their sexual orientation. As President of the U.S., would you sign an executive order banning discrimination in the military based on sexual orientation, and
Yep.
could you comment why or why not?
Yes. I would. The best time to have done it would have been just in the afterglow of the victory of the Gulf War. I think you know this, and it's been fairly well documented, but during the Gulf War, when we had a manpower shortage and we were putting hundreds of thousands of people into the Gulf, the expulsion of homosexuals from the military basically was slowed to a walk, so that you actually had people in combat there who were gay, as you have had in every war we've ever fought, as everybody knows, as every other army has always had. And then the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, I think has done a good job, said in the aftermath of the war that this was a quaint ruling. I think he used the word quaint, and he couldn't think of any reason to continue it. We now have a Pentagon study which shows that there is no evidence whatever that this has undermined the national security. And in my elbow room theory of American society, I think people who are gay should be expected to work and guaranteed the right to do so, and should be given the opportunity to serve their country. And that's what I believe. Yes.
Governor, this is one of the few opportunities I've had to be on this side of the job interview process, and let me say that I'm impressed so far.
It's a lot more fun, isn't it? Your side.
It certainly is. In your speech, you spoke about a lot of human issues such as healthcare, education, and training for workers. I'm concerned about another problem that I think is holding us back from growing economically, and that is the crumbling infrastructure. My question is specifically, do you have a plan to revitalize the transportation or other infrastructure systems in this country, and if so, what is it?
Well, in general, I think we have to go back to the percentage of GNP we were spending on infrastructure 30 years ago. And it may take a while to do it. We may be able to do some of it with debt, because we know we get a payback on that. But I believe that we have to substantially increase our spending, not only on roads and airports, but on communication systems and on water and sewer systems. I mean, one of the real problems we've got with offshore pollution near a lot of cities in this country is just old, antiquated, and overburdened water and sewer systems. So I think we ought to spend a lot of money on it, and Professor Rice here has written a lot about how it will increase our per capita income about as quickly as anything we could do. You could also put a whole lot of people to work. So I wish I could be more specific with you, but what I would do is immediately upon election, and maybe before we can work it out, meet with the leadership in Congress and come up with an infrastructure strategy that I think will increase our growth rates and put a lot of people to work in the interim. It's a big issue with me, and we've always tried to spend a lot of money on it at home. I can tell you that what I've done at home is we have raised taxes twice for education and twice for roads, and had 2 bond issues for water and sewer issues. And so that'll give you an idea of basically where I think, and then we paid all of our current expenditures, we just paid for with our revenues. And I think we have to increase our infrastructure investment. Yes.
As you may be aware, Paul Tsongas, who is also interviewing for this job, was here last night.
And a wonderful man.
He was here last night.
The only other person besides me to put out a plan, too, by the way.
Anyhow, what he was talking about to a great extent last night was economic issues. Some of the things that he was talking about sound very similar to what you're talking about, some of the ideas about investing in the private sector, working towards developing an national industrial policy and trade policy, and coming up with incentives for long-term investment in strategic industries. And in the effort to assist us in our job search here, I was wondering if you could comment on your differences or similarities with his position.
I think that our economic positions are reasonably close. I haven't read the economic call to arms lately. I read it the day I got it in the mail, and I've reread it once. So, I mean, I don't want to say that I remember everything. I would tend, I think, to put a little more emphasis on a dramatic increase in commercial research and development and a massive attempt to figure out how we can better convert our new frontier ideas into jobs in this country instead of letting them fly away. I am basically against any measures that could be interpreted as being blanket protectionism, but I do favor specific retaliatory capacities. If there is a difference between us, I think it is that in addition to what I think is a largely common core of knowledge about and a real concern about how to make the private sector vibrant again, it is that I have devoted an enormous amount of time in my life to the educational and social and health issues, and I just had the opportunity to do that because of the job I've had.
Thank you.
But I have an enormous amount of respect for him, and I think that the message that he is taking, that we have to grow this economy first so that we have the capacity to fulfill our historic social mission as Democrats, is absolutely accurate. Yeah.
Yes, Governor Clinton, I'm very...
He says, I got this little note here that says my handlers want me to stop taking questions. You want me to stop taking questions? You're doing the job interview. It's 9:15.
We basically have time for, I think, these last 2 questions, and then we need to close.
Well, we got to go up there. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. We'll go. She's next, and then y'all up there.
Thank you. I'm very interested in your list of 25 industries that you believe that if we were to do something with, those could really save America. And you've spoken, you said you're not for protectionism, but you certainly don't want our industries to be harmed. And I'd just like to hear some specifics about what you would do to encourage these industries, or what are some of your ideas about what to do with them?
I'm sorry. The Commerce Department has a list of emerging technologies which they believe will provide most of the high-wage, high-growth opportunities as we move toward the 21st century. Most other countries have some sort of agency in the government which makes sure that we are amply funding research in these technologies and have a theory about how to convert them into jobs. And we don't. That's the point I made. I'm basically a market person. I mean, I think you're always going to have new firms starting and firms failing. The only problem I have on that is I think we need a labor market policy in this country that doesn't make the working person bear the full brunt of a firm's failure. Today, what normally happens in one of these over-leveraged companies is if the company fails, the people lose their jobs and may never get another one paying as much. Some of them have even lost their retirements, and the people running the show bail out with golden parachutes. What I think we need is a system which guarantees people who lose their jobs get opportunity to upgrade their training and to grow economically. Yes, one more.
Governor, I've really enjoyed hearing you. I just wanted to tell you that, but I do have a question. One of the things that our current president has differed from previous presidents in doing is in putting pressure on the state of Israel to make a lot of concessions, to come to the peace process, etc. That has made him significantly different from Presidents Reagan and his predecessors. I'm wondering where you stand on the Arab-Israeli conflict, what you would have done differently from Bush, and also if you could comment on other Middle East issues such as the Syrian annexation of Lebanon, because these issues just, are pretty important, or at least so according to our current president.
Well, I think the President and the Secretary of State, as I said earlier, deserve a lot of credit for getting the countries that are in Madrid to the peace table. And I basically support what the Secretary of State has tried to do. I guess I have two reactions. One is, I think the President made a mistake in the way he handled the Israeli loan guarantee delay. Not only, and maybe not even so much in asking for it, but the way he asked for it and the way he tried to sort of turn it into a foreign aid whipping boy. You can always make votes in this country on foreign aid. People don't like it. A lot of people think half our budget's foreign aid. They don't know that we give less than most other countries do. But I thought that that was unfortunate because I think it is important for us to fulfill our 20-year commitment to resettle the Soviet Jews. I think the devolution of authority in the Soviet Union is basically a good thing, but can be predicted to lead to significant dislocation and insecurity over there. So they'll have their share of David Dukes, and I think that there's a history in that area of anti-Semitism, which I think you can expect to flare. So I think it's all the more urgent that we fulfill our commitment. We have a limit of only 40,000 Soviet Jews being able to come into this country per year. So my best judgment is we should facilitate that relocation independent of the other issues. Now, I sympathize with the President and the Secretary of State, and every time Jim Baker goes to the Middle East, there's a new settlement announced by Mr. Sharon. But I think that that is not justification for the reaction we had there. That issue ought to be put on the table at the peace conference. I think the settlements issue, the territory issues, all those issues ought to be put on the table. And my own view is that the only thing I would have changed, I think, in the afterglow of the Gulf War, the Secretary of State immediately began to try to pressure Israel again. I think Israel is well aware of what it might have to do if we ever had a lasting peace in the Middle East. And I think we need to work more on defanging a lot of those other Arab non-democratic countries. I'm very worried about the prospect of having a peace agreement in the Middle East, which we and the Soviets will be called upon to enforce with the explosion of armaments we're seeing now in the non-democratic countries there. So I'm very concerned about that, and I hope we can find a way to tie to this process a commitment by the world's arms merchants, including us, to slow the input of arms into into the Middle East. And surely, to goodness, we can stop the Chinese from helping the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. That would be insane. Thank you very much. It's going to be a long campaign. If you want to help, come down here. I need your help. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me get that up. Thank you, Governor. Before you all leave, on Election Day at the Institute of Politics, we always have some programming. Excuse me, let me just have your attention for 1 minute. And our Student Advisory Committee has asked me to point out that on Election Day, November 5th, Tuesday at 8 o'clock, going to be showing a film, The Candidate, and George Gorton, our political analyst from California, Governor Wilson's campaign consultant, will be here to talk about that movie and about politics, and you're all welcome to come. Look for these disgusting yellow posters all around the school. Thank you, and let's thank Governor Clinton again for a great performance tonight.